Growing your Turo fleet without using your own cars or your own money sounds like a pipe dream. But there is one avenue that could potentially make this a reality, and that is co-hosting. Co-hosting is the business model of car sharing, where instead of you, the Turo or car sharing host, buying your own cars with your own money, you instead get other people, like investors, to send you cars and you operate them in your fleet and a profit split takes place. This is a business model that has grown in demand over the years. And today, I'm going to break down the biggest things that you need to know and keep in mind for co-hosting as somebody who has spent time with some of the biggest and most successful co-hosting operations in the country. But before we dive into that, Black Friday season is officially here, and the Car Sharing Masterclass 3.0 yearly Black Friday sale is live as of you watching this video. And this Black Friday sale is a little bit special because it is our first Black Friday sale on our new and updated Car Sharing Masterclass 3.0. You can use the code BlackFriday308 to get $308 off your purchase of the Car Sharing Masterclass 3.0. This is the biggest sale that we've ever run, and once it's over, it won't be back until next year, so you will not want to miss it. I've been the Turo host for over 8 years, and I've compounded my knowledge and experience into a condensed 10-hour-long course known as the Car Sharing Masterclass 3.0. And I will show you every single thing that you need to know about starting your own Turo and car sharing side hustle. Everything from LLCs, how insurance works, what kind of cars to buy, where to buy cars, how to automate your systems and processes, what to do if your car is in an accident, new sections on direct rentals, and we just recently launched our new service called Car Share Connection, which connects course members with investors who are both wanting to get involved in co-hosting, as well as everything in between. We have hundreds of successful students, and I would love for you to be our next success story. Click the link in the description below to learn more, and between our 30-day no questions asked money back guarantee and our Black Friday sale, this is your chance to steal the deal today. Now in this video, I want to talk about the 5 core things that you need to know about co-hosting if you are someone who is either wanting to get started with co-hosting or you're a current host who's maybe mulling this over. And again, this is from the perspective of someone who has spent time with some of the most successful co-hosting operations in the country. The first tip that I have is to have experience. I see a lot of hosts who want to get started with co-hosting after maybe only having 1 or even 2 cars listed on Turo. And in some cases, I meet people who want to get started with co-hosting before they even have their own car listed on Turo. And while this avenue is absolutely not impossible, it is incredibly difficult, and in general, it's an avenue that I don't recommend pursuing. I'm a big believer that if you're a co-host, before going out and recruiting investors, you should yourself know how to operate a Turo fleet. And this really comes down to the fact that you need a value proposition. If you're a brand new Turo host, why on earth would someone trust you to manage a car for them that can make them passive income? Instead, what I would highly encourage anybody to do is to learn about Turo. Learn how to efficiently operate a fleet. Learn how to handle and navigate claims cost effectively. Learn the do's and don'ts and ins and outs. The biggest value add with co-hosting from an investor's perspective is the ability to get into Turo without getting your hands dirty. And so as a co-host operator, you need to be able to fulfill on that promise. But you'll never really be able to do that if you yourself don't have experience with Turo first. And I'm not necessarily saying that you have to be an expert Turo host before you bring in your first co-hosted vehicle, but you absolutely should know how to navigate the platform. And as you gain experience and expertise, getting more and more clients is going to be easier because your value proposition will become more clear as you have more to show for your success. The second thing that you should absolutely be thinking about is the contract that you have between you and the investor, and there absolutely should be a contract in place. We actually have a contract template in the Car Sharing Masterclass that many of our students use. You can use the code BlackFriday308 to check out the contract for yourself. This is a contract template specifically for co-hosting operations between the co-host and the investor. But regardless of whether you use our contractual template or another one, here are some of the things that you should be keeping in mind. What's the profit split? Is there any sort of incentive for sending more cars your way? For example, maybe the profit split is 60-40, but if they send you 10 cars, it goes up to 70-30 in their favor. What happens if an investor decides that they want to take the car back? What are the terms associated with that? Maybe a 30-day notice? What types of cars are you going to host? Are you going to have a year or mileage limit? And who handles costs associated with the cars, trackers, maintenance, insurance? Most of the time, this is paid for by the vehicle owner, while the operational costs, so things like staff or parking, is paid for by the co-host. But this is absolutely something that you will want to work out ahead of time. When should payments be sent out? How frequently will you send out payments? When and how are you going to send accounting info? These are some of the things that you need to be thinking about. Now, whenever it comes to a profit split, the numbers that I very frequently see are 60-40 or 70-30, with the vehicle owner getting the higher of that split. And really, what split you use is ultimately up to you, but you should even be thinking about things like what happens if the vehicle is totaled, who gets that money? Obviously, the vehicle owner would get the money, but if you did something on your end to maybe result in a higher payout, would you guys split that amount? And the same goes for damage claims. Let's say, for example, there's a $10,000 damage claim, but it only costs $5,000 to fix. What happens to that additional $5,000? How is depreciation accounted for? These are all things that you should absolutely be thinking about, because I'm a firm believer that if an investor knows what they're doing, or if they're a savvy investor, they will probably be asking you these questions and you need to have an answer to them. And on the topic of savvy investor, let's move on to bookkeeping, which is the third point that I want to talk about. All successful co-hosts have one thing in common. Okay, maybe not one thing, but this is one of the things that many of them do have in common, and that is very clear, concise, and organized bookkeeping. This is absolutely crucial because the moment that you accept an investor, it is your responsibility to be able to clearly and accurately present to them how their investment is performing. And you really can't do this without organized books. And this task ends up becoming more difficult as you scale, because if you have disorganized books with one car, imagine what your books are going to look like with 10 cars, 20 cars, 30 cars. Now, Turo and car sharing accounting can be very complex because not only should you account for the overall business expense, so how is the overall business performing, what money's coming in, what money's coming out, but ideally, you should also be accounting for each individual vehicle as well. How much money did this car bring in, and what were the costs associated with this car? And whenever it comes to co-hosting, it really becomes a non-negotiable to have a vehicle level accounting method, because investors for your co-hosting operation will want to know how their vehicle is performing. Now, truthfully, I don't have a perfect system for this, but some of the different methods that I've used over the years includes QuickBooks or something similar. And a few strategies that I've used with QuickBooks that work are things like using classes. Now, QuickBooks class is basically classifying where money is coming from what category. We use classes as in, is money coming from Turo? Is it coming from direct rentals? Is it coming from our camper van? Those are the classes that we have with our own business, and we categorize our income or expenses based off of class for these purposes. However, you could instead use QuickBooks classes for individual vehicles. So you could have a class for a 2010 Honda Fit, a class for a 2020 Odyssey, a 2018 Lincoln Navigator, etc. We actually used to do this back in the day whenever I did our own accounting, but we switched the method whenever we went to an accounting firm. This can be a great way for QuickBooks to organize for you where money's coming in, where it's going out, and for which car. However, this is dependent on whoever manages your QuickBooks understanding where these charges are coming from and where it could be allocated to. Another strategy I've also done is doing regular audits on your finances to allocate where money goes. For example, you have your expenses tracked from a company-wide perspective, but you also have a secondary spreadsheet that may look like this. The categories by car, and you literally go through your expenses and log each expense. We used to do this where we would do financial audits every 2 to 3 days with HP and I, where we would say 2547, and then HP would look through his receipts and say that was an O'Reilly's charge and it was allocated to the 2010 Honda Fit. Or I would bring up a charge $10.18 from Walmart, and HP would respond, oh, that was the Ford Focus and it was maintenance. And so on and so forth. This was a method that no doubt worked. It was incredibly detailed, but it was also very, very time consuming, and it was in general difficult to keep up with. As I mentioned a moment ago, I don't have a perfect process for this because as my fleet has gotten bigger, my per car accounting has gotten worse, and in general, I do rely on my boots on the ground knowledge of knowing which cars are broken, which cars are costing money, and the income that they bring in to determine which cars are costing us money versus which ones are making us money. But having a system and process in place to keep your books organized is absolutely crucial. Another thing that you should absolutely be thinking about is damage claims and how to handle just general issues with your fleet. This is something that Alvin in Jacksonville, Florida, I think handles really, really well. He has a really great cost-effective process for handling damage claims to where his out-of-pocket cost for his investors is pretty limited. And I think that being able to accomplish this type of thing really only comes with long-term experience. The reality is Turo claims are daunting. They can take a long time. It can be difficult to know when to push back and when to let up. And I think honestly, this is part of Turo where good co-hosts can be most valuable. The reality is Turo is easy whenever things are going well. And I think in general, no one has a great Turo experience and then says, you know what, I think I want to quit. Instead, people end up wanting to quit or they want to outsource the work work because of a poor experience that they had, or it's because they're brand new to Turo and they just don't know how to get started. And so it's your job as a co-host to know how to navigate those bad experiences with a lot of knowledge. How do you file a supplement? What happens during a total loss? What happens if Turo wants to total out a car that you don't want to be totaled out? What happens if there's mechanical damage, if a car is stolen? These are areas where it's a good idea to have experience in before recruiting a co-host. And last but not least is really understanding why people want a co-host and ultimately creating a sales pitch to cater to those individuals. This is an important one, and it's also one that I find extremely interesting, and it's basically the question of why do people co-host? Well, there are a ton of different reasons, and in my experience of spending time with these co-hosting operations, there are a few similarities that I have seen throughout the country of why ultimately an investor or vehicle owner will send their vehicle to a host. The obvious one is that they had a Turo car or a Turo fleet, and for one reason or another, they just can't operate it anymore. Maybe they had a horror story and just got turned off from Turo. Maybe they have like a change of circumstances in their life. They just can't dedicate the time to it. I've heard of a number of different stories of somebody who used to be a Turo host getting out of Turo and then relying on co-hosting as a result. Another extremely common reason why people get into co-hosting is because they're upside down on a loan. They purchased a car, they owe more on the car than the car is worth. They want to get out of the vehicle either because they can't afford it or they just don't want it anymore. And so they send it to a co-host to help them pay down that loan. That car makes them money, they can use that money to pay down the loan, and then they aren't out of pocket for the cost of the underwater loan. In my opinion, I think that this is one of the coolest and kind of most helpful and applicable scenarios where co-hosting can be really handy because it really takes a bad scenario and it turns lemons into lemonade. In fact, Brian in Seattle, I did a video about him a couple of weeks ago. He said that a big portion of his Teslas come from customers exactly like this. People who are upside down on their Teslas because they hold their values so poorly and they just need something to do with it. Another less common scenario is somebody's in the military, they're here in the United States, and then they get moved to either an overseas base or whatever the case is, and as a result, they don't need their car, in which case they will sometimes send it to a co-host, they make some extra income, their car is somewhere where it's not taking up space, it's not like getting charged parking, it's not going to get stolen, it's kind of a win-win. And then the fourth, and I think less common, but in my opinion, the area where there is the most opportunity is with people who are truly looking for either passive investments or they're looking for an incredibly beneficial tax play. This is something that I've talked about in videos over the years, but I'm a big believer that Turo and car sharing can ultimately be a tax play similar to real estate. There are a ton of deductions in the world of car sharing, and if you play this right, you can substantially reduce your taxable income, and I think that this is an untapped market in the world of both car sharing, but also kind of tax planning as well. And I have talked to a number of hosts over the years who have been able to successfully tap into this market, get a hold of wealthy individuals who send them potentially dozens of cars as a tax play. Knowing who you're targeting, why they could be potentially leaning into co-hosting, this is something that's incredibly beneficial because again, it'll let you know what type of pitch you should have and what questions you should be able to answer. Like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys